Admittedly, this review may seem very similar to the earlier Z5 Compact review. Aside from the slight difference in physical size, screen resolution and the extra gig of RAM, these two phones are an almost identical experience. Traditionally at Clove, we've seen greater sales for the compact line than the equivalent full-size model. At just over a month since launch, history has repeated itself. With the Z3s last year, this was largely put down to a big difference in price. In 2015 though, the price of the two is much closer, and yet we've still seen a big split. I think this goes to show that there is a definite demand for a powerful, smaller phone, and Sony seem to be the only manufacturer catering to it. However, the larger phone does exist, and it isn't selling badly by any means, it's just being outsold by the smaller phone. Sony have to release this premium flagship though. They need to be seen to be competitive in the high-end Android game against the undoubted leaders, Samsung. Now that HTC have largely been undone, there's a space for the number 2 Android OEM. With some very good brand recognition, Sony are in prime position to consolidate this spot in Europe, and so the flagship Xperia needs to tick all of the right boxes on the specification sheet. It certainly does that, and now after several iterations, the Xperia Z range also really looks the part. A consistent design language across the Z5 family creates an appealing first impression. Plus, if you get to put a Z5 in your hand, it does, to me at least, have the just right feeling. It's a very well balanced block, and whilst a little understated compared to Samsung's recent attempts at flair in the S6 line, the simple, machined look of the Z5 succeeds in being classier. Sony's name also still holds a lot of weight among tech and gadget enthusiasts. It's this recognition that both allows the Z5 a few concessions, the corners are a bit square, which looks more professional but isn't always pocket friendly, yet also defines some of the design before it begins, such as the need for more expensive premium materials. Samsung got away with cheap materials and flimsy panels for years, because in some ways it was expected of them. If Sony had tried that, they would have been laughed at. Instead, the Japanese manufacturer has continuously used metal and glass in the Xperia Z phones, whilst managing to keep them waterproof since day one. That's no mean feat, and remains very impressive. Sony don't get enough recognition for this in my eyes. When you see the Sony logo on anything, you approach it expecting a product with a high quality finish, one that will also be asking you to pay for that quality in comparison to the competition. The Z5 is no different. All the previous Z flagships have launched with a fairly high price, and with an RRP of £530, the Z5 is at the top end of what you may be willing to pay for a flagship Android. This price will undoubtedly fall in time, especially with much of the competition cutting prices for the holiday period. However, don't expect anything drastic. Sony believe they have something worth paying for, and in some ways they're right. Smartphones, like laptops before them, have become commoditized, to the point where their value is pretty obfuscated. If you look at what you actually get for your £500 in terms of hardware, the Z5 is probably still worth the money, even if the equivalent Samsung, LG or Motorola is now £100 cheaper. The biggest difference between Sony's new phones is the physical size. The Z5 is obviously larger than the Apple-named Compact for height, width and screen size. The differences are 21mm up and 7mm to the sides respectively. Now that's not insignificant. You can clearly tell the difference even from a distance. The Z5 is a little like a squashed compact, as it is also much thinner, about 1.6mm or so. The balance in the hand remains, and despite being considerably bigger than the compact, doesn't feel imposing or overly large. Thinning out the profile and smoothing the edging makes the Z5 look like a slightly more finished item than the compact. Whether it was a design decision to have the compact somehow look a little less premium in a side-by-side situation, I don't know. However, that's certainly the effect you get. The Z5 appears to be the more premium phone. The USB port on the base removes the port cover, seen on previous Zs. This has now been treated to be water resistant, so ensure it's dry before you charge. The magnetic charging plate on the left side of previous Zs has therefore gone as well. A new universal USB dock is available for desktop tidy people. On the left edge is the single port cover for the phone, which hides the SIM and memory card trays. This cover has a satisfying click when closing, so inspires a little more confidence about its durability than the previous line. There's a gap for the lanyard on the base by the USB port, with the new signature Xperia logo engraved into the bottom left of the casing. I like this neat touch. The power, volume and camera buttons are all on the right edge, the first of these incorporating the new fingerprint scanner, which, just like the compact, is very effective. Also, just like the compact, Sony have stuck the volume rocker below the power button. It's a similarly unnatural placement for the first-time user, though you do get used to it over time. The light-catching two-tone effect from the back cover is also on the Z5, with the various logos and markings appearing and disappearing as the phone is turned and tilted. There's little more to say about the camera than was already covered with the Z5 Compact, as the hardware is identical across the Z5 range, as is the software and main processor. The increase in working memory on the Z5 does appear to result in a slightly better response time from the app. For what it's worth though, Sony probably still need to patch both the individual system software versions and the camera app to find a balance that works better across the whole Z5 range. When they crop up, occasional lag and response issues frustrate the taking of what are great images. The results of these images remain very good, and they're on a par with the best images you can achieve on a Samsung Galaxy or an Apple iPhone. For the best results, keep at the standard 8-megapixel super sampling resolution and only jump up to the raw 23 megs if you're looking for super fine detail and post-capture editing. Those with a more discerning eye than mine will likely want to pore over the results and run comparisons. Feel free to, and I'm sure there will be differences to analyse amongst all the major phones in different scenarios. What I can definitely say though is that you won't be disappointed. Sony's tagline of "the world's best camera in a smartphone" is intentionally provocative. However, you can't deny that they're shooting for the moon. If it takes a panel of experts and several comparison articles on the web to argue if this is the best camera or it isn't, all this tells me is that the layman probably can't tell the difference, so as a minimum it must be just as good for the average user. Video also remains very high quality, with some added features such as slow motion and speed effects, alongside a much more stable 4K recording environment. Just over a year or so ago, Sony had the lightest of the OEM skins and launchers that sit atop Android. Known as Xperia Home, the interface remains relatively clean and easy to navigate, however it has suffered a bit from feature creep in its most recent iterations. There's a fair amount of non-removable Sony system applications, most of them centered around Sony's entertainment network. For instance, video and music replace the stock Android players and contain links to Sony services and content delivery. You can't deny Sony the opportunity to install these extras though, and the system remains far less in your way than the likes of Samsung's TouchWiz or HTC Sense. Similar to Motorola's Migrate app, Sony have also included a dedicated widget on the homepage to help new users port to an Xperia. That's an oft-overlooked feature, and it's welcome on any device. There's a bit of clutter in the app drawer too, although much of this can thankfully be uninstalled. Sony also allow for a bit of tweaking and customization of the interface in the settings via the themes engine. Options to change notifications, power management, and screen white balance are all welcome. Sony's version of Android remains one of the better implementations, even if it has got a bit chubby around the edges recently. It'll never be as clean as most of Motorola's takes, however you still get the impression of being in control rather than forced into a workflow, as with some other systems. Battery life remains average as always with Sony. A peek into the stamina mode, similar to the new doze feature in Android 6, is always recommended to take a look at putting to sleep any stray apps you might have eating up extra power. In conclusion, I sound very similar to the Z5 Compact. The fool says Z5 gets the job done. This is a flagship phone for people who don't care too much about the branding. Sony seem to go through cycles of being cool and uncool, whilst stoically releasing good to very good products regardless. Whatever fashion trends exist in technology to account for supposed coolness are beyond my understanding. However, if it doesn't matter to you, then an Xperia Z5 could well be the phone to go for. The design is simple, basic even, while still managing to appear classy. Even the silly gold version that everyone's been releasing in 2015 doesn't appear ostentatious, with a toned-down matte hue to it. The build is solid, and pretty much everything just works without getting in your way. This is what we expect from Sony, and this is what Sony have delivered. The standard Z5 sits a little awkwardly in the middle of the compact and premium with current SIM-free pricing, so it will probably find most favour with those who are tied into upgrade cycles. It will undoubtedly be offered on very good contract deals at the same prices as its direct competition. That competition is strong in the SIM-free market though. Sony may well find it difficult against big price drops from the Galaxy S6, last year's iPhone 6, LG's G4, and even newer Motorola devices. Savvy consumers may well be swayed by the low headline prices of these phones if the Sony build and brand can't keep them interested. However, long-term fans of Sony's design ethos, battery life, waterproofing, and camera quality have plenty to play with.